I'm really excited today to be talking with longtime friend and Academy Award-winning sound designer Bub Asman. Well, how you been?
I've been good. We've been not terribly busy. This particular movie is not the most difficult I've ever worked on.
Hereafter?
Yeah, it's mostly a talkie. There's a tsunami scene in the first reel, which is kind of busy, but other than that, it's mostly just people talking.
Well, you were telling me about that. You said the first film that you ever got to be the supervisor on was Bridges in Madison County, and there was no explosions, no car chases. It was
Nothing.
just
People and cars out in the middle of nowhere. And not many cars, to tell you the truth. Clint drove a truck around, a pickup truck, and that was pretty much it for the cars. Yeah, there was just nothing to it. We really stretched to try to find things to put in. And I probably told you about the dog. We put a dog barking. We see a dog early in the show at this farmhouse, and so we knew there was a dog there. So we put these occasional dog barks in, and about at the end of reel 4, Clint says, "Okay, I don't want to hear any dogs anymore."
I used to use a dog bark to cover shifts in the dialogue, between the wide shot and the close-up. If it was an exterior shot, I put a dog bark there, and suddenly you would notice the audio sounds different. But I was going to ask, did you and your brothers, John and Bill, did they all get their start with Bill Girdler?
Yes, actually, I think that is correct. My brother Bill came out of photography school, Brooks Institute of Photography, and his first job was with Girdler at Studio One Productions, that little production house Girdler had. And, when I got out of college, I basically started there, too, as an editor. And Brother John, who had been working for IBM at the time, got more interested in what we were doing than what he was doing. So he ended up there also, mostly when we got into making low-budget films. That's when John came around.
I'm sure I saw your first, Asylum of Satan. I was at the
God,
vote.
Yeah.
I think you made that, $35,000 or something?
Probably was, yeah. That wasn't much money, and I don't think the people that spent that money got it back.
But, the cool thing about Bill was that all his films tended to make money, right? I mean, so he kept getting more work.
I think so. I don't think they made a lot of money, and I know he never made a lot of money. People maybe have made money off of it, the distributors, but I know he never got rich off of it, so. But you're right, he just wanted to make enough money to get some more money to
bankroll the next
make
film.
Another one. Yeah, he just wanted to keep making them, and that was it.
Well, that's what got you out to Hollywood, I guess, right? Because he started making bigger and bigger budget pictures. And
Yeah, that's right. The first film he did totally here was The Manitou, which was his last film. And that was like a $3 million budget with Tony Curtis and some other has-been, but name actors. And that movie didn't make much money, but then he wasn't around to see it anyway. So.
Yeah, he was killed scouting locations in the Philippines at age 30.
Right, at a helicopter crash.
Yep.
So helicopters don't do so good when they fly into power lines.
Yeah. How did you first start working with Clint Eastwood then?
After Girdler died, I was sort of lost. I didn't really have any connection out here anymore. But one of the sound mixers on The Manitou, the last picture that Girdler did, I ended up calling him and asked him if he knew of anything. And he said he had just had lunch with the guy who was the head of sound effects at Paramount Pictures, and they were looking for editors, and I should call the guy. And I said, well, I'm a picture editor, and they're looking for sound editors. But he says, you can handle it. And so I ended up calling the guy, and that was on a Friday, and I started work as a sound editor on Monday at Paramount, not really ever having been a sound editor before, but having learned back home, back in Kentucky, on these low-budget films where editors do it all. So I did know a little something about editing sound effects, but I wasn't confident enough to think I could do it at a studio feature level. But as it turned out, I could, and at least people thought I could. And one of the first films that we were assigned was Escape from Alcatraz, which is a Clint picture that one of the few pictures he's done at Paramount. 99% of them are done at Warner Brothers, but I guess Paramount must have owned that script or something, but he ended up doing it for them. And the staff, sound effects department people were assigned to do the show, and my current partner, Alan Murray, and I did it pretty much by ourselves. And so when the next Clint Eastwood picture came around, which I think was Any Which Way You Can, which is one of the monkey movies.
Yep.
Clint's people called us and said, you guys want to do another one? So at that point, we left Paramount and came over to Warner Brothers. Yeah, so we've been doing them ever since.
That's super when the director likes your work and wants to give you more work. I mean, that's great.
Clint's like that.
Yeah.
Clint he's about the most loyal Hollywood guy you'd ever know. I mean, he's got people that have been working for him longer than us. And that was like 1979 when we started as, kids. And here he's 80 and I'm 60. So we've been together all this time. But most people aren't so loyal. It's more about the money. Who can I get to do it cheap, than it is who has done a lot of great work for me in the past, so I want to hire him back. Sometimes that's not as much of a factor as you might think.
In 79, you also worked with Spielberg on 1941, and I remember you told me the story that you were telling some of your buddies right after the film was released that, yeah, I really hope to work with Spielberg again, and they were saying, why? And I guess LA can be a tough crowd if your film doesn't make $1 billion at the box office.
Yeah. That's true. I really enjoyed working with Spielberg, and I do wish I had worked. Technically, I have worked with him in the past because he's produced a number of films that Clint directed, including Letters from Iwo Jima.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, after winning the Academy Award and coming back into the auditorium, Spielberg actually popped right up out of his seat and shook my hand before anybody else, so that was kind of a nice moment.
Wow, that is cool.
Yeah, I wish I'd worked with him before, only because on 1941, he was young and excited and wanted to learn everything he possibly could about every aspect of filmmaking, so he was as much interested in what we were doing and how we did it as we were in him. And plus, we had great respect for him. I mean, what we didn't know at the time 1941 was going to bomb, but all we had known about him was that Jaws and Close Encounters and some other great movies that he had made. And I didn't think 1941 was as bad as everybody else.
Oh, I liked the film too. I thought Eddie Deason was very funny in the thing.
Oh yeah.
Originally, when you were working in the business, of course, you were using Moviola synchronizers and Chem and Steenbeck tables and lots and lots and lots of sprocketed film. Talk a bit about the problems with editing audio on those systems.
Actually, on film sound, we didn't even use flatbeds. It was 100% Moviola and synchronizers on an editing bench, and lots of cranking of film. Two big drawbacks. One, you can't see the sound on MAG, which I didn't realize at the time probably, that I really needed the sound or how much it would help if I could actually see the sound, like you can see the waveforms on Pro Tools. You can't see it, so you have to listen, and you have to listen carefully, and you have to mark it all the time to mark where loud things are and clunks and clicks and all the things that you want to use to sync to certain parts in the picture. You have to find them carefully and mark them and listen to them over and over again. You just can't really see them, and so that was tough, but I guess I didn't know it quite so much at the time. The second thing is when you're editing on film, you can only listen to one sound at a time because it's not multi-track. It's just one sound piece at a time, and you're building one track at a time. And the only way you can even hear two or three things at the same time is to roll them through the synchronizer that has sound heads on it and listen to them at sort of your own speed. You're trying to crank them through using rewinds. If you haven't seen the process, it's probably hard to visualize, but anyway, it's hard. Now we can listen to up to 75 different things at the same time and hear how they're all going to sound together, and that's just makes life so much easier. Plus, we have the ability with Pro Tools to adjust the sound level. On MAG, you couldn't do that. Whatever level the sound effect was, that's what it was, and it was up to the mixer on the mixing stage to balance all those sounds together. But we had no ability to adjust that, and now we can. So by the time we give it to the mixer now, everything is sort of balanced against each other level-wise, so that you don't get blown out of the room or things don't get lost. Back in the old day, low-level sounds tend to get lost because they'd get buried and the mixer would not really even know they were there most of the time. But now we can bring those up, we can bring the loud ones down and balance it all before it gets to him.
Yeah, you can kind of make his job a little easier by kind of doing part of his job there.
Yeah, we don't want to take his job away from him. I'm an old school enough that I don't do that. A lot of new guys will pre-mix things together so that the mixers of today don't really have the ability to undo anything or to go back to a cleaner, raw element of anything because everything is sort of pre-mixed together. We don't do much of that. Occasionally I'll bounce a couple of sounds together just because it's just easier for me to deal with it that way. And I don't do any EQ at all. That's a mixer's job. And I would never, ever add reverb to anything because you can't undo reverb.
Right.
Once you've put it in there, it's stuck in there if you've re-recorded it that way. Again, that's a little bit old school. But I believe the editor's job is the editor's job and the mixer's job is the mixer's job. And although that's changing totally.
I was going to point out to the students that in Hollywood, you have to declare that you're a recorder, an editor, or a mixer. And once you do, you can only do certain functions. They don't want people trying to take over everybody else's job. You're an editor, and you generally don't want to do too much mixing or too much recording because that's kind of not your function there.
Yeah, but unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, that's changing quite rapidly, too. Many sound editors, because of their work on Pro Tools and its mixing capabilities, they're carrying it to the next step. They're actually moving from the editing room right onto the mixing stage and becoming the effects mixer on the show. That actually happens quite a bit. The guy that won the Academy Award this year, Paul Otteson, won for both. He won for both sound mixing and sound editing because he did both jobs.
I did an ADR thing recently for Secretariat, the Disney movie, and typically when we're doing ADR, we get a quick time that's got split track like production dialogue on the left and M&E on the right. They actually sent me a Pro Tools session. It was kind of interesting. I got to see all their effects tracks, but they were doing some mixing with it.
Was this from the picture editor?
I guess it was a sound editor because...
must be a temp. They must have been doing a temp mix.
It might have been. I was going to ask you about that too. Before I do, though, I've shown students pictures of the old dubbing stages with all the machines in the back room. The question came into my head, when it was mix day, I mean, did you have to get like a couple of semis full of, because you had a lot of tape to bring?
Right. There was a few times we had trucks pick up our units, is what we called them, and haul them to the dubbing stage if it was not on the lot. Most of the time we're on the same lot as the mixing stage, so it's not that big of a deal. We just got an assistant with a hand cart, and he or she puts 20 or 25 units on the hand cart and drags it over the stage one grouping at a time.
Yeah, make 12 trips or something.
Yeah, it was terrible. I mean, we've had shows with just thousands of those units, which is terrible.
How do you deliver today?
Hard drives.
Hard drives.
Just carry hard drives to the stage.
Do you actually take a Pro Tools session, or do you actually transfer it to another system?
No, we deliver self-contained Pro Tools sessions, where you do save copy as, where all the media is there with it, and give it to the machine room, and he copies it onto one of his systems, the Pro Tools session, with all the media files.
Cool.
And we dub right from the Pro Tools session. And on the mixing stages now, they have Pro Tools systems out in the room with the console. So we can see what we're mixing from at all times, and if we want to change something, it's a quick fix. I pop that session up on that machine and find that track and fix that little piece. And pretty much every stage now is gone to Pro Tools mixing, both as a source and recording. You know what I mean? They record from Pro Tools to Pro Tools.
Sure.
So the world has shaken out the pretenders, and Pro Tools has won.
Well, that's good, because that's what I'm teaching, and some of my students have used some other systems. I said, well, it'd be a good thing to learn Pro Tools. That's come up with some of the other people I've interviewed. They say, yeah, we might use Logic for the music, but the editors finally want to see it in Pro Tools. But do you still make cue sheets like you used to do in the old days, or is there not a need for it anymore since they can see the Pro Tools session and see what's coming up on the screen?
Yes and no. Depends on the mixer. When we mix up at Skywalker Ranch, the George Lucas facility, those guys don't use cue sheets. They just mix right from the Pro Tools with a monitor right there so they can see the tracks going by. But out here at Warner Brothers, most of the mixers have been around a while, and they still prefer to see cue sheets because you can write on them, you can make notes. It's a record of what's there that you can easily look something up in another reel without having to put it up on the computer. So
you do this by hand? I mean, it's not like a computer generated?
We actually use a program called Agent Orange.
Oh.
Some creepy guy wrote this program for free. You can download it anytime, called Agent Orange, and you use Pro Tools' function, export session info as text.
Oh.
And you can save a file that way and then import it into Agent Orange, and it prints out a nice little cue sheet.
I have to try that. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Explain to the students the difference between what you are, a supervising sound editor or a sound designer, versus just a normal sound editor.
I still do quite a bit of sound editing, so I am both. But the supervisor just kind of wrangles all the departments and all the crew members, and those numbers of people are getting smaller and smaller. They probably don't want to hear that in terms of jobs prospects in the future. But as a supervisor, it's just like any sort of business manager. You get to wrangle the day-to-day problems that editors might have and the mixing stage might have, and it's mostly just dealing with people and problems. But also, I still edit, at least probably half of the sound effects in the movie, so I am kind of busy. But the second aspect of that is going to the mixing stage and supervising the mixing of all the pre-dubs in the final.
As I was going to say, you're actually not only invited, but kind of required to be there.
Yeah, so one of us has to be there for sure. There's, it's two supervisors, and normally I'm there at all times because my partner is not so technically savvy, so he's even more old school than me. He can cut on Pro Tools, but is not very good at it. So if we're mixing, I'm always on the stage to be able to handle any problem that might come up or fix any sort of things that might need to be re-edited or something like that.
Cool.
But the supervising sound editor's position on the mixing stage has actually changed pretty much over the years, too. So he's far more involved in the decision-making of how the mix goes down. Used to be you'd deliver all the stuff to the mixer, and the mixer would sort of take command and decide how things should sound. And nowadays it's more the supervisor telling the mixer what to do.
You make the decision, like which door slam to use, the one in production dialogue, the one in ADR, the one in Foley?
Yeah, and balance, how it's balanced. On Clint's shows, Clint doesn't come around until the final. We've got it in pretty good shape, and then we bring him in for a playback. He doesn't sit there all day while we mix the reel over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
So as supervising sound editors, we mix the reel to our own liking, including, how the music sounds and how the dialogue and sound effects all blend together and what we think it should sound like in the theater. And then Clint will come over and listen to it and make decisions about what to do if different, if we miss something, or if he wants to feature the music a little more or a little less, or sound effects a little more or less.
Gotcha.
But he doesn't get into the nitty-gritty of the process, and sometimes he'll just say, that reel's great, let's move on.
What a guy.
I mean, it happens. It doesn't normally happen. That's a rare occurrence for a director to do that. Some directors are way more hands-on. We've worked with all kinds, the ones that want to finagle every little thing, and to the ones where they really don't know what they're doing on the mixing stage. They kind of trust us to do our own thing.
One of the things you told me that the supervising sound editor did too was you're kind of responsible for assembling the source palette, saying this is Clint's gun, this is the car. Because you, as an editor, you may work on reels 1 and 4 or whatever, and other people may do the other reels, but you also have to make sure that all those sounds are consistent throughout the movie.
Yeah, every pair of supervising sound editors work different, but in our case, Alan and I, his primary job is to pull all the sound effects and sort of cue them, we call it. So the editor gets basically a list for every single sound effect in the movie, broken down by category.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like, this is a pre-dub that has just all the guns in it, and here's the next pre-dub that just has all the principal cars in it, and the next one has all the background cars, and the next one has all the just various categories. Here's the wind, and there's another one for the birds, and you know what I mean? And it's all broken down that way, and he'll cue it. He'll say, okay, here's 8 different bird tracks. Pick 3 of your favorites and cut them from 118 feet and 12 frames to 290 feet, for this whole scene. So he doesn't say, cut this sound effect at this moment, but he gives you sort of a group of 4 or 5 things and say, pick 3 and cut them for this guy's gun or things like that. And that's his job, and because he's doing that, he's the one that's making sure that we are consistent throughout the show, because he's only giving different people the same material for the same sounds throughout the movie. And if it's something specific as a gun, he will tell you exactly what to cut, because if he gave you 7 different gunshots and say cut 3 of them, well, I could cut a different 3 in one reel than somebody else cut in the other for the same guy's gun. And you clearly wouldn't want to do that.
Yeah.
Although that did happen on a show. On Lethal Weapon, I can't remember which one, but we had 3 different gunshot sounds for Mel's gun and 3 different gunshot sounds for Danny Glover's gun. And in one reel, they got backwards. So fortunately, we were the only ones that noticed it.
Yeah.
But it happens sometimes.
Well, you were talking about the fact that not only the audio guys are cutting nonlinear, but now the picture editor people are using nonlinear as well. And it's kind of a double-edged sword, because that's made life difficult in some ways for you, too, with changes every 10 minutes. Mm-hmm. You were telling me one time, kind of like chasing your tail, like you'd spend all this time editing, and then they say, we changed the picture totally.
Yeah, it happens. Again, Clint Eastwood, fortunately for us, is not one of those people that do a lot of changes. He kind of locks it down and gives it to us and sticks with it. The primary change factor for a Clint Eastwood show is visual effects, because they may come in and look different or be slightly different than what we were originally given. So he might have to make picture changes around how visual effects have changed. But generally, those are pretty easy and not that big of a deal. On other movies, especially action movies, it's a constant moving target. They just never stop changing the movie. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of changes per reel from one week to the next. And fortunately, with Pro Tools, it's way easier to do changes, because you can change 100 tracks at once.
Right.
A couple of key clicks, whereas back on the film days, if I had 100 tracks, that's 100 separate sound rolls, having to roll them 3 at a time through a synchronizer and, make a 6 6-foot deletion and then crank some more and make another 2-foot deletion and do that 3 reels at a time for 100 reels. That's a lot of work.
Yep.
And it can be very confusing, whereas with Pro Tools it's a million times easier.
Yeah, and just making sure you have the right version delivered to the soundstage for mixing.
Well, yeah, that could be a problem. It never is. I mean, we're quite good at labeling. Everything that we do has a date and time on it. So hereafter, Reel 4, version 517, which means that's the version that was given to us on May 17th.
Gotcha.
And you just have to make sure that every file name has a date on it, so that actually sometimes they've given us changes on the same reel twice in the same day, so that can get a little confusing.
The afternoon changes.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
A few years ago, you worked on a DVD project for Clint where you had to redo the original mono soundtrack to a 5.1 for 5 of Clint Eastwood's Dirty Harry movies. What were some of the challenges doing that project?
Yeah, the first 3 of them were mono.
Oh, were they? Okay.
The first 3 Dirty Harrys. We did the last 2, so we did them stereo, and I think the last one we did with surrounds, but back in those days, the surrounds were one track. It was basically a mono surround that was played out of both surround speakers. It wasn't a discrete stereo surround.
Right. What were some of the issues? Because you had to go find the original dialogue stems and then try to get music mixes, because music was probably mixed mono, right?
Yeah. Fortunately, we didn't have much to do with the music. We never do. That's the one area that there isn't much crossover. Music and sound effects are 2 totally separate entities, and we'd hardly ever have dealings with them as a sound editor. But on those movies, yes, they did go back to the stereo original recordings of a lot of the music throughout the movies, but sound effects-wise, we didn't get rid of anything. All the original sound from the movie is still there. We just overlaid it with new things. Because they were mono, we had to lay it out as 5.1, left, right, and left and right surrounds and sub-sounds where they needed to be. Like low-end gunshots and things like that, and explosions and whatever. But we just enhanced everything. But we didn't feel like we had to change anything. We didn't feel like we had the right to change anything. You know what I mean? We want to keep the integrity of the original work, but just make it sound better. And nobody complained. So I guess we must have done okay. But,
cool.
Those were fun, because I liked those old movies.
Yeah, they were good movies.
The original Dirty Harry was one of my favorite movies.
Yeah, you said not only were they good movies, but they were locked down and nobody was making any picture changes.
That's the best part, yeah.
You told me that on Lethal Weapon 2, you actually were doing elaborate temp mixes while the production was going on, as opposed to waiting for the post-production step. Does that still ever happen?
No, hardly ever. I wish. But the business now is about saving money everywhere possible, and I don't want to sound angry about it, but too many times the decisions are made based on cost rather than quality. But that was a pretty nice deal because, as you said, the picture editor would give us just some scenes in the movie that needed sound effects, because when he played the scenes for the director or for the studio, the scenes just played so much better with a full sound effects track in there, and it made his cut look better. So he got us on payroll early, about like a month and a half before they even finished shooting, and we were on the show for another 5 months after that, or 6 months after that.
Were you able to use any of those effects?
Yeah. Most of that stuff stayed in the movie. Everything just got shorter. I know the movie starts in the middle of a chase scene where a bunch of cops are chasing a bunch of bad guys, and the original version of that scene was like 1,400 feet long, and it ended up in the final movie being 700 feet long. But all 700 of those feet were in the original version. So we just had to keep pulling things out and tightening up and trying to figure out which car bow went with which one and which siren went with which one, and try to trim it all down. And as I said, it's like shooting at a moving target all the time.
Yep. Have you ever used the Wilhelm scream in any of your films?
No, deliberately not.
Okay, very cool.
We were tempted. Actually, I think it would be fun, but Alan, my partner, says no, absolutely not.
Okay.
It's kind of funny, though, when you think about it.
I can't really let you leave without telling your story about after you won the Oscar for Letters from Iwo, you were trying to fly home, and they wouldn't let you on the plane. They think you were a terrorist?
Well, it's not quite like that. We were waiting to get on the plane to fly out to go to the Oscars. And I walked over to security, and I says, okay, in the unlikely event that I win an Oscar, will I be able to carry that Oscar on the plane? And the guy said no, because it's big and it's heavy, and it would be considered a blunt object, and you couldn't carry it on the plane. So I thought, oh, crap, okay, now what do I do if I win? So after I did win, I had to quickly make a decision, because the Oscars were on a Monday night or a Sunday night, I can't remember which, but we were flying out the next morning. So I figured I had to somehow get it to me, so I decided to let the hotel concierge hire somebody to pack it up and send it to me. So they did that and got Federal Express to send it, and it got lost in Federal Express
No.
where they were supposed to deliver it. And what do they say? When it absolutely positively has to be there overnight, well, they didn't make it. And when I got to work that next morning with everybody expecting me to have the Oscar in hand, I didn't have it. And there was television stations with cameras and people like that waiting around to see it, and I didn't have it. So they even made national news. I mean, that kind of thing got picked up. And, the Oscar's lost. I mean, it wasn't really, according to Federal Express, it wasn't really lost. It just didn't get on the plane out of L.A. when it was supposed to. So they knew exactly where it was. It just wasn't where it was supposed to be. Let's put it
Well,
that
you
way.
finally got it, so the story has a happy ending.
Yes, I did. I got it the next morning. So.
Well, Bub, very cool. I thank you for taking all this time, and I appreciate it so much. The students are going to love this. It kind of makes my year here. So, again, thank you.
Well, next time, hopefully I'll be home, and I'll come in person, and then we won't have to do it this way. And I'll talk to the class, and they can ask questions themselves.
Well, we'll have to have a cover charge at the door then. Thank you so much.
Okay, we'll talk to you later.
Okay, Bub.
Bye.